Time community, and welcome to the Wheel of Time Podthru. I'm Teresa.
And I'm Tim.
And together we're going to walk through Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time book series. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing great. I'm excited because this is our first episode.
Our first episode, yay!
Yay!
So because it's our first episode, we should probably take a moment to talk about how this podcast is going to work. Let you know what to expect. So we are going to walk through the entire 14-book Wheel of Time series. We are going to go chapter by chapter, usually 2 chapters per episode if we can swing it. We might change that up depending on length of chapter, because if you've read the series, you know
some of them are long.
Some of those chapters get really long, especially towards the end. But also, some of the chapters just naturally fit together. So we're going to make sure to talk about those chapters together. So some weeks we might have 1 chapter episodes, and some weeks we might have 3 chapter episodes if we can fit it in.
Right.
But we're going to try to stick to the 2 chapters per episode schedule. And you may have noticed I said a 14-book series. We are not going to cover New Spring or any of the short stories. We aren't going to pretend they don't exist. Like they're part of the canon, and we'll reference what happens in New Spring and the short stories. But we're not going to go chapter by chapter like we are the main body of the series.
We have nothing against them. It's just there's just so much to cover without them that we want to focus and get through to the end of the story.
Right. And, I mean, who knows? It's possible we might cover them in bonus episodes or special, treats later on. We'll see how that goes.
So that brings us to spoiler warning. That's right. Sorry, don't mean to yell. But the whole thing about this is a reread. We are going through this again. We assume that you've already covered all the content yourself. So we really hope that you tune in with us and you subscribe and watch us, because we're going to be going through all of this, and we're going to be talking about our favorite bits and how some things get, revealed through. We could talk about certain characters, but please be warned and act accordingly. We are going to assume you already know the content. We are going to spoil a lot of stuff. You've been warned.
So, talking about spoilers, the other big elephant in the room is pronunciation. All right, so again, if you've read the series, you know that Robert Jordan created a whole slew of new words with very strange spellings. And it's kind of up for grabs how they're pronounced. Yeah,
some of us went to homeschool, so when I pronounce things differently, it's going to sometimes be weird.
Neither one of us have listened to the audiobooks.
True.
And you've heard some interviews.
Yeah, there's some videos floating around on YouTube that you can find Robert Jordan talking about some stuff and various things.
I haven't heard any of them. So it's possible, and I would say likely, that along the way we may pronounce things differently or wrong, however you choose to look at it. I just want to say that we're not here for pronunciation. Right. We are here because we love the story.
Yes.
We love the way Robert Jordan wrote things. We love what happens to the characters. We don't necessarily want to get bogged down in too much of that minutia. Let's all just be a community together and be patient with each other. Feel free to email us. Let us know if you have corrections. We welcome corrections. We welcome discussion and debate. But at the same time, let's just all be on each other's side. Let's have a supportive community. And if we pronounce things differently than you pronounce things, we're not saying that you're wrong. We're not saying that we're wrong. We're just both coming at it from a slightly different angle. But the important part is, as long as we can communicate and understand what we're talking about, that's what really matters.
Right. So I don't care if you say pop. I don't care if you say soda. We know you're drinking something.
As long as it's not, you have a fizzy drink.
Exactly.
So what are we doing in this episode, Tim?
Oh, in this episode, right. Sorry. We are going through the prologue of The Eye of the World. And if when you read this through the first time, you're kind of plopped down into this already created, very expansive world, and you're just kind of thrown in. So we also, before we get to the prologue, want to talk about how we got to the prologue, because there's a lot that happens leading up to the prologue. So now that before we get into the prologue, are you ready to start talking about some history?
I am. Okay, so we start off in the Age of Legends a long, long time ago. And basically, Robert Jordan set up the Age of Legends as a utopia. So there were a lot of scholars and universities, and there was very little crime. And people pretty much just had peaceful, happy lives. It wasn't perfect. Like, there were still
problems.
Still some problems. But in general, it was a utopia.
Right. There were scholars that had medicine, that they knew how to do medicine in an advanced way. So people still got sick. It wasn't perfect, but it was a really, really great ideal of society.
They also had some advanced technology. That's one thing when spoiler alert, when the world gets broken and things get thrown into chaos, they regress a lot. I'm not saying that they had all the technological advances that, say, we have today, but it was much more progressed than the medieval times, basically, which is where the story is
coming out
set.
Yeah.
It's 17th century, something like that.
It's a pretty much accepted trope in most fantasy or dystopian things that, we start off really great, something happens, and because insert a whole bunch of things here, we're worse off than we were before. And that's kind of where we're picking up here.
Right. So, the other thing to note is that during the Age of Legends, they were both male and female Aes Sedai.
Yes.
So they were both using, they were using Sidar and Saidin in conjunction with each other. Balance is very, very important in Robert Jordan's books.
Yes.
And it's important to note that in his idea of utopia, men and women worked together for the greatest effect.
The most amazing things ever accomplished always happen with a man and a woman working together.
Yeah, in balance and harmony.
Right.
So they were in this wonderful utopia in the Age of Legends, and a few of the Aes Sedai, but led by Lanfear, or Mirren at the time.
Mirren.
But, we know her as Lanfear. She discovers that there's this new untapped power that seems to exist outside of the pattern, and she wants to tap into it. She's a very ambitious woman, so she and a few of her colleagues try to tap into it, and in doing so, they basically bore a hole into the Dark One's prison. At the time of creation, the creator bound the Dark One in his prison. And by trying to tap into this power, which we learn later is the true power from the Dark One, they bore a hole into the prison. And now the Dark One is able to touch the world directly. And chaos ensues.
So when we say the Dark One touches the world directly, and again, all before the prologue, what's going on is we have people starting to pick sides because there's this new power out there driven by the Dark One, and we have Forsaken being these are the people like Lanfear who have actually been chosen by the Dark One, approached directly by the Dark One to be his doers of things in the world, and then we have Dark Friends who work for them, and then we have other dread lords popping up who are
the hierarchy of the dark.
they're people who can wield Sedan and Sidar and all that stuff, but they're aligned with the dark. We have and then we start to get creatures. Like some of these Forsaken start using their knowledge to create creatures. So we have all these really amazing things start to pop up for the forces of bad.
So I have a question about the Forsaken.
Okay.
My understanding is that the Forsaken, what the difference between the Forsaken and the Dreadlord, because a Dreadlord is just a channeler who has gone over to the dark side, right?
Yep.
Okay. The Forsaken are the ones, either they were the first to turn to the Dark One, or the most powerful. Okay, so they're handpicked.
Right.
I know that one big thing that separates them, what makes them the Forsaken, is that they have given themselves completely over to the dark side. So they get a new name to signify that change.
And there's one other very important different thing about the Forsaken as opposed to the Dreadlords, and that's the Forsaken can channel the true power. the Dark One allows them to tap into his power.
Although most of them don't, because it comes with its
with
own
consequences, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. But what I think is interesting, we know that Robert Jordan definitely had a religious background.
Yeah.
And so he was very familiar with the Bible. And what I think is really interesting, because all of the Forsaken have a new name. Every single one of them. You can look throughout the series and see their old name, what they were known as in their regular lives. And then once they choose the dark side and become Forsaken, they get a new name. And what's interesting is that there are parallels to the Bible. Because if you look, Abraham in Genesis used to be known as Abram until he makes his covenant with God, and then to signify his new life, he becomes Abraham. It happens in the New Testament with Saul when he meets Jesus on the road to Damascus and has his come to Jesus moment. He gets a new name and becomes Paul as a signifier of his new life in Christ.
Right.
And so here...
And it's not restricted to Christianity either. I mean, this happens in Buddhism. We see Siddhartha, and we see this happen in a lot of different religions. You don't want to just say it only happens in Christianity. Sorry.
Right, okay. So here, Robert Jordan uses the same device. Like these Aes Sedai, when they choose to go to the dark side, and not just choose, but choose to completely dedicate their entire lives to darkness, they, in a sense, get baptized into darkness and walk forward in the newness of their new dark lives with a new name.
Right.
And it's a very clear symbolism or callback to the Bible that I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah. So we got... Thank you for that. We have all these... We have Dreadlords, we have Forsaken, we have people starting to pick sides, and in the midst of all this, so that's the forces of the bad guys. So on the other side, we have the Aes Sedai, who at the time, it's men and women channelers. It was the Hall of Servants, not the White Tower.
Because the White Tower didn't exist yet.
Right, and so we have Louis Theron Tamelon. Yes, I think that's how we're going to say his name.
Talmon?
Talmon? We talked about pronunciation earlier.
LTT.
So LTT, we're going to see this guy. He's going to come back throughout the rest of the series, so get used to his name. So he is like the guy in charge of the Hall of Servants, and he's like, I've got this plan. And what we're going to do, we're going to go and we're going to go and we're going to go find that hole and we're going to patch it and we're going to fix this. And all the women in the Hall of Servants go, we have a different idea. Which we'll come back and we'll talk about.
And some of the men too. It wasn't just the women.
Some of it, but he was like, "No, I am the greatest. I am the greatest Aes Sedai of all time. We're gonna do this." Yeah. So and then he gets 100 other men. Funny, no women actually side with him, and this will come back later in a very big way. So all these men decide
the 100 companions.
100 companions, and Louis Theron Tamelon go to the Dark One's prison. Well, not to his prison. They go to Shagaul, where he lives, and they patch the prison. But guess what? When they show up, this is the cool thing. All the Forsaken are there having a club meeting. So they all just happen to be there. You know, the wheel has brought this huge big pattern together, and it's great, and it's awesome, and it's great. And they bind all the Forsaken and the Dark One back in his prison. And they have these little seals that they use to seal the Forsaken in individually. So they're all set and they're ready to go. But...
And yes.
So...
As a final stroke before he's sealed...
The Dark One decides to release his taint of his essence into the male half of the power. And instantly, every one of the 100 companions goes insane. Every single one of the 100 companions. Not every man at the exact moment. But when they're done, the 100 companions, nuts. And as time goes on afterwards, we find out it's not just those guys that get driven nuts. Any male who touches the source from that point on also gets tainted and brought into this madness and will go insane at some point in their life if they continue to touch the source, which they can't stop.
Right.
So that's the situation we end up in right before
that
this
leads us to the prologue. So we pick up the prologue, and the title of the prologue is Dragonmount, and the icon is the wheel icon. And so We open with Louis Theron in his home, and it's destruction everywhere. People are dead, like the walls are crumbling. It looks like a bomb's gone off. It's utter destruction. But Louis Theron has already gone mad, so he doesn't see it. So he's walking through the halls, calling out to his wife, wondering where she is, and he doesn't see the destruction that's before him.
Right.
And then Ishmael shows up.
Ishmael.
And you will hear a lot about him in the first several books.
He's kind of important
He
through the
is.
whole series.
He super
actually.
is.
Yeah.
So Ishmael shows up and he sees what's going on, and he's surprised that Louis Theron has already been taken so much by the madness, which is just an indication that not a lot of time has
passed
elapsed between
since the Dark
One being And he tries to talk to Louis Theron and taunt him and do his bad guy shtick, and it just Louis Theron is not catching on
because he's completely insane.
Yeah, like he doesn't recognize Ishmael. He asks him, "Oh, do you have the voice? Are you here for this singing and all this stuff?" And Ishmael is not having any fun because what's the point if you can't taunt the enemy? So he actually uses the Dark One's power to heal Louis Theron of the madness, and it's really interesting because. He tells Louis Theron, if your brother or sister Aes Sedai tried to do this, it wouldn't work.
Right.
At least not for very long. And that's true. Like, the madness of Saidin is not healable. At least not until much later when our very, very special magical healer shows up. But we'll talk about that when that happens.
We love her.
We do. But anyway, so because he's using the true power from the Dark One, Ishmael is able to heal the Dark One's taint. And then Louis Theron kind of wakes up to the destruction around him, and he sees that his wife is dead.
Yes.
And, of course, gets completely racked by grief.
At first, he thinks that Ishmael did it. And Ishmael's like, no, sorry, dude, I got to give you the bad news. Actually, you did all of this.
Right.
That's why they call you Kinslayer. Louis Theron's wife is dead. And once Ishmael heals him, he is just emotionally racked. He's got his wife's body in his arms. He's crying. He is calling out to her. He is incensed. And what Ishmael drops here is a little bit of knowledge that the Dark One is the Lord of the Dead. That means if Louis Theron joins Ishmael in serving the Dark One will bring his wife back. Theoretically. Well, as much...
That's what Ishmael says.
Can you trust Ishmael? Can you trust the Dark One? I don't know.
Father of lies?
We will find out later on in the series that this is not a bluff. The Dark One actually can bring people back from the dead. Ones that he needs, the Forsaken. He does this later on, and it's a whole complicated thing. But it is not a bluff. Like, those of us who read the story know that Louis Theron knows he's not lying too. Mm-hmm. This is a real deal. You side with me, and we can go ahead and we can side with the Dark One, and the Dark One will rule forever, but you'll get your wife in the process, and that's worth it, isn't it? I don't know. Louis Theron doesn't take the deal, but it's good to kind of stop and talk about that was the offer put on the table.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that the Dark One has control over the dead, I think, is partly because time is a wheel. Right. And the Dark One exists outside of that wheel.
Right. So let's talk about that a bit. When we say time is a wheel, what are we saying?
So after Ishmael heals Louis Theron and he comes back to his senses and he's railing against Ishmael for killing his wife and blah blah blah, he talks about how they've been entrenched in this battle for 10 years, indicating that it's been 10 years since Lanfear bored a hole in the Dark One's prison, mm-hmm. and all the wars were happening to this time where we are. And Ishmael has this great conversation with him. And I'm going to read this quote. Ishmael says, "This war has not lasted 10 years, but since the beginning of time. You and I have fought 1,000 battles with the turning of the wheel, 1,000 times 1,000, and we will fight till time dies and the shadow is triumphant." And so what Ishmael is saying is, you may only be aware of this current battle, But let me tell you, we've been on this cycle for a millennia. We are never getting off this horse. Like, we are going to be locked together in battle until the end of time. And that is actually the crux of Ishmael's problem.
Because this is not the same, like you hear people talk about, oh, life is circular, circle of life, things always come back. No, this is not everybody dies and everybody comes back to no, this is not it. Ishmael comes back. Louis Theroux comes back again and again and again.
But the thing with Ishmael is that he's aware of it. Like, right. Louis Theroux doesn't realize that he's lived this life before, but Ishmael does. He gets spit back into the pattern, I think, on like a 1,000-year cycle, and he's around for like 40 or 50 years. But he knows that he's on this pattern. So he is tired. He's done. He's done this before. He's seen how this has played out. And he just wants the Dark One to win so that time will be over. Because if the Dark One wins, then it'll throw, the pattern into chaos and the whole world will crumble and time will cease to exist and, yada, yada, big bad. And Ishmael's all on board with that. He's like, I've done this. I'm done. Like, please, can we just stop this circle? So, and it's really interesting because Robert Jordan uses this same existential crisis for several of his dark characters. It's not just Ishmael. In the second book, we'll see Ingtar, and he has a similar existential crisis. This happens, for a few dark characters where they realize the futility of the battle between good and evil, and they feel like they lose all faith in the light. They feel like good will never win. They lose all faith in humanity. And they turn to the dark side because they think it's an inevitability. Well,
and I think it goes a little bit, I think it goes slightly deeper than that. It's not just inevitable that the dark side, that the good side is going to, quote unquote, lose. It's inevitable that by the good side always winning, we are going to come back to this again and again and again. And the only real way to end existence is to let the dark side win.
Yeah. It's not that they don't necessarily think that the light side's going to win. It's that if the light side wins, it doesn't matter because the dark side will always come back.
Right. And in the words of the Highlander series, who really wants to live forever?
Right?
Yeah.
And eventually, after they spar, verbally spar, Ishmael clues Louis Theroux in that he, in fact, is the one that destroyed everything around him. He killed all of his family and servants and everyone in his house, and he killed his wife. And Louis Theroux finally gets that memory, the realization, he gets the reality of it, and he can't take it, and he runs away. He flees to what is basically an open field, like an open land. And he is just racked with guilt, and he realizes his folly, and he takes in as much of the sources, more really than he can handle. He's wearing this like crazy strong Sangreal at the time, and he just takes in this incredible amount of the power, and he destroys himself, and in so doing, he creates Dragonmount as like a testament to where he is. Like he breaks the world basically, like seas heave and the land splits apart and just crazy happens. So he creates Dragonmount, and then he creates this island. Like the field he was in is sort of near a river, and the river ends up forking around and creating an island that is in the shadow of Dragonmount. And that island becomes Tar-Valon, the seat of the Aes Sedai. But before he does this, he has a realization that it is his pride that led him to think that he could match their creator and seal the Dark One back up. Because again, the Dark One was sealed by the creator at the time of creation. And so he has this quote Because in his pride, he believed that men could match their creator, could mend what the creator had made and they had broken. In his pride, he had believed. And that is what caused the destruction of the world. Mm-hmm. And it's really important because Rand al'Thor, who is the Dragon Reborn, who's Lews Therin reincarnated, also often falls into pride, and that is especially in the middle of the series and the later books is one of the biggest problems he has, and also comes close to destroying the world in his pride. Yes. So obviously pride was a very big thing that Robert Jordan wanted to focus on.
And it's no accident that some of the names that Lews Therin is called the Lord of the Morning. And then later on, we have various different names for Rand al'Thor's characters, like He Who Comes with the Dawn. Mm-hmm. A lot of these, at least we feel, are kind of like allusions to Paradise Lost, where we have Lucifer, who makes the exact same mistake and the consequences of his actions.
And Lucifer is known as Lord of the Morning.
Right, Lord of the Morning, Star of the Morning. There's a lot of morning symbolism, day star, and all that fun stuff. Yeah. So that is, we think, an exact parallel of what Robert Jordan is trying to evoke as you read through this, which I think is actually something Robert Jordan does really well throughout the rest of the series. He doesn't say that this is this, but he gives you templates. He gives you familiar feeling things so you can draw conclusions of what he's trying to do, but he doesn't necessarily use this cookie cutter thing either. So I think this is a perfect example of that playing out very well throughout the whole series.
Right. And so that basically ends the prologue and brings us into chapter 1, into the Eye of the World proper. In next week's episode, chapters 1 and 2 will get into meeting most of our main characters and doing a lot of world building and setting the scene. Is there anything else you wanted to say about the prologue or the history? Or
no, just that if you want to find out more, there is a plethora of information out there on the internet. You can find out. There's a lot of extemporaneous stuff published by Robert Jordan and Tor, as well as a whole bunch of stuff that's just fan FAQs. So there's a lot out there. We're not going to bore you with it because you
can dig in as deeply as you want to.
People have done grad level research, doctorate kind of research on this stuff, and it's scary how deep some of this is. So have fun with that.
All right. Well, we hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Wheel of Time Pod-Thru.
We really would like you to subscribe.
Yes.
Please let us know what you thought. Subscribe. Catch every one of our episodes. Send us corrections. Tell us that we're awesome. Tell us that we're not awesome. Whatever. It's great.
That wraps up our first episode. We hope that the wheel weaves you in our direction again soon.